So at this time, I'd like to present to you our keynote speaker, Dr. Odell Owens.
Sometimes I want to ask God why there's still so many poor people who have to suffer and still struggle. And what is God going to do about it? Sometimes I want to ask God why we still treat children so poorly and so many children still suffer. And what is God going to do about it? Sometimes I want to ask God why you and I still do not treat each other as true brothers and sisters of this earth. And what is God going to do about it? But Father Seville, I dare not ask those questions for fear God would ask me the same. What am I going to do about it? Yeah. And tonight, I ask you. I'm indeed honored to be here among Middletown's best and to recognize people who have character. These are people who are known for giving. But what is giving? What is a gift? We begin to enter the season where you hear so many people now talking about what stores are going to be open on Black Friday, Red Thursday, Blue Tuesday, midnight, 8 o'clock. And people are beginning to make their lists of gifts. But what is the greatest gift? What is the greatest gift? The greatest gift is to give unasked. To give unasked. And I'm willing to bet that many of our honorees do give unasked. Tonight I want to share 3 stories. The first one, this year I'll be celebrating the 10th year of what the Enquirer nicknamed Odell's Bells. 10 years ago I read the paper one morning where Target department store decided that the Salvation Army could no longer ring their bells outside the stores. They said, no, it can't be there. And in Cincinnati, that represented an $80,000 loss for the local Salvation Army. I called them up and I said, look, I can't replace the $80,000, but I'm willing to highlight your plight, and I'm willing for 3 days to stand on Fountain Square from 11 to 1, and I'll ring the bell for you. And I called some friends and I said, you know, could each friend join me for 1 hour? The great Oscar Robinson has done it every year for me. The great lawyer Stan Chesley has done it. Bengals, and I've had monkeys and penguins and Lucy Collins, and we, in that 6-hour period, had been one of the most successful kettles in the country. 3 years ago, it was a really cold and snowy and a really bad 3 days. It was cold. And after 2 years, Dean Gregory, who was one of the owners of the Montgomery Inn, decided he would join me on the Friday. We do it usually Wednesday, Thursday, Friday before Christmas. And he came and he would serve sandwiches. He brought pulled pork and Saratoga chips and coleslaw. And he set up a stand, and I was just amazed at the homeless who had no phones. Boy, the word was out and they were in line in 5 minutes. I was amazed. But I noticed that across the street, where I was standing on Fountain Square, I'm across the street from Tiffany's. And when I got there at 11 o'clock, I could see that a homeless man was there. You know who he is. You've seen him. He's the one with the sign that says, hey brother, can you spare a dime? And I noticed that he sat in front of Tiffany's, and I said, oh boy, that's the spot. Can you imagine, Father, that you spend $3, $4, $5, $10,000 on a necklace or a bracelet or a watch, and you walk out and someone says, can you spare some change? If not, God bless. But I noticed he didn't get a lot, but he was there. But I noticed they didn't come across the street to get the food. I said, oh, he's so protective of the spot. So I fixed a plate and I took it over there and I gave it to him. At 1 o'clock, as we were shutting down, cutting down the kettles, he walked over and he stood in front of my kettle and he poured everything that he collected that morning into the kettle. I'm a grown man, but I nearly cried. And when he poured into that kettle, he slowly stood up and a smile came on his face. For that moment in time, this homeless man had dignity. That homeless man said, I'm going to help someone else less fortunate than me. How can you be less fortunate than a man who has to stand and sit on the cold ground and shiver, hoping that, hey, brother or sister, can you spare a dime? That man taught me. He taught me the difference between donating and giving. Giving is when you give when sometimes you really don't have to give, but you have a little bit more and you want to share. I'll never forget that man. I'll never forget that man. Second story I want to share with you. A few years ago, I started a program in Cincinnati called Project Grad. Actually, it's celebrating its 11th year. It was a program where we took 4 of the poor schools, and the poor school we defined by percent of free lunch. And my 4 schools had 94%, 95%, 98%, and 100%. I'm embarrassed to stand here and tell you that in Cincinnati we had a school, an elementary school of 455 children, and every single child was on public assistance. You understand the impact. These are children that when they go to play with each other, they don't see a working person. All they know is public assistance. And one of my schools, was a little boy in the first grade, and he was always the first kid in line for the free breakfast. So many of these children, if it wasn't for the free breakfast or lunch, they wouldn't get a meal the way you and I describe a full meal like tonight. They don't get that. They don't get that. Their last meal is oftentimes their lunch at school on Friday. Or through the weekend, they may get some potato chips and a bologna sandwich, maybe a bread sandwich if they're lucky. But every day, he's the first kid in line. And the first 2 days after he had his breakfast, he would walk into the classroom, and the first question he asked the teacher was, when's lunch? She said, you just had breakfast. He said, when's lunch? And they noticed that he and his brother would sit there and eat the breakfast, and they would whisper, and they were looking over the table where all the little boxes of cereal were lined up, and they were plotting to steal them. Yes, they're thieves, 5 and 6, but they're only stealing food. This little boy's in first grade. He's already had two foster families. We talk about family here tonight and the strength of a family. This boy's had 2 foster families. And what really punctuates and complicates this story is that he has lactose intolerance, the inability to digest milk or dairy products, but he's first in line for milk and cereal. He knows, and he has it bad, that within 20 minutes he's going to have explosive diarrhea, and maybe once or twice within a relatively short period of time. So when that happens, he walks into the classroom. It's a first grade class. The kids are young. They don't know what they're saying or doing. They all grab their nose and say, that's Stinky coming into the room. And they pull their chairs away from him. Who do you think is going to be the bully? Who's your candidate to be the dropout? Who's your candidate to be the drug boy? It's being decided right there. This little boy in first grade, when the kids tease him and he goes home to his foster family, he can't go home and say, Mommy, Mommy, help me. He can't get home. And for you mothers in the room, he can't come to you where you, the mothers in this room, can put your arms around the child and give that hug that allows all the problems and pain of any child to escape. Because you're in the arms of your mother, you can feel that love. He doesn't have that. He can't go and say, Daddy, help me. But don't worry about him. Don't worry about him. There's a gang out there waiting for him. they're going to show him the love that nobody's showing. When I was a coroner, people kept saying to me, wow, there's such violence in Cincinnati, such homicides. How come people can't love their community, love each other? And I say to them, how can you love when no one has loved you or taught you how to love? What's going to happen to that boy? 2 foster families, and he's only in 1st grade. The 3rd story is in the same school. Little girl in the 1st grade. This little girl, how many teachers in the room? How many people here have tutored in elementary school? Oh, you know her. She's that little girl that comes to school. She's sometimes a little dirty. Sometimes her hair hasn't been combed. She's as cute and sweet as nice. You know her. She may not look like my little girl, but you know her. She's the one that will grab your hand when you come and see her. She's the one who wants to hold onto your skirt. She's the one that you said one day to yourself, oh, I wish I could take her home. But when she goes home, she in 1st grade has got to take care of her younger brother and sister. See, mom's a crackhead, there's no dad. When I think of this little girl, I think of a poem written in 1759 by Sir Thomas Burns, one of England's greatest writers. He was in England going down a country road with a group of his friends, and they came upon a country church. In those days, all the churches had their own cemeteries. And they got and they walked around, and he was struck by the number of graves of poor children. And he was saddened to the point of crying. He said, these are children who died because they were poor, children whose voices would never be heard in the opera halls, children who would never go to school, children who wouldn't have a family. And he wrote a poem, Eulogy in a Churchyard. And the epitaphs, the last part of the poem said, he gave to misery all that he had, a tear. He gave from heaven all he wanted, a friend. How sad that you live a life full of struggle, but the only thing you have to give is a tear, and you have to die to get a friend. I think of this little girl. You see, she's cried her tears when mama hasn't come home. She's cried her tears when they didn't get fed. She's cried her tears when they sit in an apartment with no electricity and it's cold and they're alone. You'd have to listen to her heart to hear her cry, because she has no more tears. Because you see, that last tear is when mama's boyfriend came over and took her to the back bedroom to play that secret game she's not allowed to talk about. I was called to a scene as a coroner in Cincinnati one day. And the police said to me, well, this is an area of prostitution. We have interviewed the prostitutes. Now, the 13-year-old prostitute told us. I said, wait, 13 years old? They said, yes, not the first. Probably won't be the last one. She's a crackhead. We've already taken her to University Hospital. I think back to this little girl and wonder what's going to happen to her. Who's going to reach out and touch her so that she doesn't go there, but that she can be here? She's in your community. She may not necessarily look like my little girl, but she's in your community. Who's going to reach out and touch? Who's going to change her life? You see, one day when the pages of your lives are reviewed, when you have to stand, whoever that may be, your maker, what's going to say about you? It's going to say, what did you stand up for and stood up to? It won't be enough to say, I went to work every day and I raised my own family, when so many of God's children and deserving children are out there suffering. What's it going to say? You see, when I think about you and look at this audience and similar audience, I think of that old Negro spiritual. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. The song doesn't say this mega light, this big light, this great light, this famous light. It said this little light, the love in your heart, I'm going to let it shine. The second verse says, I'm not going to make it shine, I'm going to let it shine. Meaning that you're sharing your humanity, you're sharing your love. No one is paying you or begging you or forcing you to. You're going to let it shine. The last line says, this little light of mine, I'm not going to shine it in the light. I'm going to shine it in the dark. If I lit a candle in this room right now, it has no impact. Turn out all the lights, make this room dark, and one candle will light this room. Just one person in this room can make a great difference. You see, I truly admire Kathy Mulligan for what she's doing in my school. Oh yes, Kathy, you're tutoring math, but it's more than that. You're changing lives. And as a corner, let me tell you, you're saving lives, because the majority of kids of homicides, the majority didn't finish high school. We won't talk about the shooters, but the victims didn't have a high school diploma. I used to go around Cincinnati. I used to give 150 talks a year as a corner, telling young people, get an education to move on, get an education and be a productive citizen. And then finally I said, get an education to save your life. So you see, Kathy, you're saving lives, not just making productive citizens. And in Cincinnati State, you're giving them that opportunity and the confidence and self-esteem. Oh, if I can manufacture it, who am I can have you package self-esteem for me? I stand on the corner every day and just pass. That's all we need is self-esteem, because then people will then say yes or no. See, in this country, people used to ask me all the time, what we're going to do about the violence? We're going to do about the violence. I tell them, teach a child how to read. You see, from kindergarten to third grade, you learn to read. After third grade, you read to learn. And if you can't read by third grade, you're in trouble. You're in serious trouble in this country. Biggest issue for me is we're losing the family structure. 40% of all children born in America today are born out of wedlock. 40% of children are not born in that family unit. And yes, there have been great single parents who raised great children, but for the most part in the urban core and in the rural areas, that burden of raising children is truly a burden in a good sense needs two people. We were a stronger country when we had that. We got to somehow bring back that family structure and that family value, because that was certainly a theme of all the individuals in this room, from Mr. Hightower to Kathy Mulligan to Bob. The family structure and the support that you have. Somehow we feel embarrassed to speak up about that. Somehow we feel we have to be quiet. No, we must begin to take a stand. Whether it's politically correct or whatever, it's not about religion, it's about humanity. We have the data, we know what happens. A strong family gives you that support. I lost my mother when I was 11. I do what I do because my mother, before she died, said, you will do better than me. My mother and father both didn't finish high school. But my mother told us every year to my brothers and sisters, you're going to do better than I. And so when people introduced me and they said, well, it's Dr. Owens, he's got 3 degrees from Yale Medical School, he's got 1 degree from Harvard, he taught at Harvard Law School, he created the first test tube baby in Cincinnati. What they don't tell you is that when I was in 9th grade, I had flunked out of Walnut Hills High School right after my mother had died. I lost my hope, my will. I lost my inspirer. And in the 9th grade, the counselor said to me, you are too poor and too dumb to go to college. Take shop. We're going to teach you how to make ashtrays and tables. And I begged her, I said, please, I need 9th grade algebra and biology because I have a dream. I want to go to college. I had to beg her, Kathy, to take algebra and 9th grade biology because she was going to put me in 3 shop classes where you make ashtrays and tables and bigger ashtrays and tables. So you see, for me, my passion comes not from an oath, not from a promise, not from a contract, but from a promise to my heart. I'm not at Cincinnati State by accident or by default. I'm there because I want to be. I want to open that door. I want to take young men and women and say, you have value. I want to take young men and women and say, it's never too late to realize your dream, to want to do more for your family. Never too late to say, I want to be better. That's how we build and keep building a great country that we live in. He gave to misery all that he had a tear. He gave from heaven all he wanted, a friend. Be that friend. Be that friend. Be that friend. Thank you.
Present to Dr. Odell Owens, the champion of character, for being that champion, as you just heard, for the young people, for being a champion in our communities. Dr. Odell Owens, thank you.